Have you ever looked at the other countries that are currently cruising and wondered why they're allowed to cruise and we're not? I've enlisted friends for this video from all over the world so that we can get a perspective on why certain places are cruising and the rest of us are waiting.
Hi, I'm Chris, I'm from Australia, and we can't really cruise here at the moment.
I'm from Switzerland and I have been privileged enough to cruise on 4 different cruise ships the last 2 months.
Hi. This is Tony from the US, and we're trying.
I'm in the UK, and the situation in the UK is very similar to how it is in the US and in Australia. We're not currently allowed to cruise. If you have a look at the coronavirus numbers here in the UK and for the US, you can kind of understand why we're not currently cruising. The numbers are not looking fantastic. If you have a look at places like Singapore, where Royal Caribbean are restarting cruises, you can see why they feel comfortable with restarting cruises there. This could make you think that the more coronavirus, the less cruises. That would make perfect sense, but it's not as simple as that. If you have a look at the coronavirus numbers in places like Italy, that is looking much more similar to us in the UK and the US than a place like Singapore. But in Italy, they're currently cruising. So why can they cruise in Italy, in Germany, and us in the UK and the US can't cruise? Let's start with the US. In the US, it is almost 500,000 people's jobs rely on the cruise industry, and the cruise industry brings in around 53 billion, yes, billion, in money spent in the economy. In the wider economy, 53 billion. That's insane. At the moment, it's around 800 US jobs are being lost per day by the cruise industry being closed. There's a lot of people that say, fair enough, some people are getting coronavirus, some people are dying of coronavirus in the US, but people are also dying because they're losing their jobs, they can't afford to keep their homes. It's more than that. At the moment, it is a very, very big problem. I see a lot of people who pick on the cruise industry and they say, oh, well, cruising isn't important. It's just people having fun and spending their free money. It's not life and death. For a lot of people, the cruise industry being closed is their livelihood closed. It definitely feels like the US has been held back from cruising. I asked my friend Tony from Lido Loca why he thought that was, and this is his answer.
Okay, here's the quick breakdown of why there is no cruising currently in the United States. It goes all the way back to March, where the U.S. cruise companies, they decided they would voluntarily ban themselves from cruising. They did it before they were told that they had to do it, and that ban was extended all the way until October the 31st. And then at the same time, there was an agency that was given power by the government to regulate cruising. They're the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC. They were given the authority to say that you can't cruise, and they had a cruise ban in place until October the 31st. And now all those things are gone. The cruise companies here in the U.S., they decided they weren't going to cruise in November, and the CDC no-sail order was replaced with a CDC conditional order. So let's look at it like this. Until October the 31st, anybody that wanted to cruise, they were pushing against a brick wall. No ability to cruise at all, and now we're pushing against a very heavy door. There's a lot of things that have to happen for cruising to resume, to meet the approval of the CDC. And look, of course we have to complicate things. We also have these maritime laws that say we can't just go cruising to nowhere. We have to go to a place. So at the end of the day, we're waiting to jump through some new hoops. We're looking for places that we can cruise, and hopefully cruising will resume. The timing's good. As everywhere else in the world, the virus is wreaking havoc. Numbers are spiking up high, and the hope is that over the next few months, as the cruise lines figure out how to meet these conditions they need to cruise, that we can flatten that curve, that the world will get back a little bit to normal, and that cruising can resume. My best guess, only a guess, is that maybe paying cruise passengers on a cruise ship from the United States February? I don't know. I could be wrong, but it's more hopeful than it was a couple days ago. Like I said in the beginning, we're trying. But that's the update from the U.S.
Here in the UK, things are very similar. We're not controlled by the CDC. The CDC is an American organisation, but the government here in the UK has said that we should not cruise. Their definition of a cruise is, cruise ship travel means staying overnight for at least one night on a sea-going cruise ship with people from multiple households. So you can't even do a very quick one-night stay overboard on a cruise. No cruising. If you try and go on a cruise when the government of the country where you live says that you shouldn't cruise, that will probably invalidate your travel insurance and you won't be protected. So I would strongly advise you do not cruise if the government where you live says that you shouldn't cruise. I can't believe I have to say that, but don't. And also, while I'm on the subject, get your travel insurance. I put links in the description to where I recommend you get it, where I get mine. Don't ever cruise without travel insurance. I have no doubt that when we do start cruising, British Isles cruises will be where we start because they are so easy. British Isles cruises are so much fun. I took one a few years ago and it wasn't the kind of cruise I'd ever considered doing. I'm from the UK. I thought, I've seen the UK. I would prefer to go somewhere else and get some sunshine. I even had sunshine on my British Isles cruise. We went to Loch Ness, we went to Giant's Causeway. It was so good. If ever you get the chance, take a British Isles cruise and do it with Princess. That's who I did it with and it was amazing. Australia is something of a more puzzling case. If we were to look here at the coronavirus numbers in Australia, it is almost nothing, but yet you can't do internal Australia cruises. It's very strange to me that they're not willing to start cruising. They're kind of just saying no cruises from Australia. Royal Caribbean have cancelled some of their cruises, but they're planning on starting in January. Princess have actually cancelled all the way up until May next year, so they're really not expecting to be able to cruise from Australia anytime soon. It may be something to do with getting the ships back to Australia and also getting crew. That might be what they're worried about. And also Australia did have quite a lot of negative press at the start of this. The Ruby Princess situation was not good for them. And I don't think Australia wants to just take any risks. I think they're just saying no because it is so much easier. Who better to ask about Australian cruising than a real life Australian? I've got one for you. His name is Chris. And I asked Chris why he thought Australia was not cruising yet.
So I think the Australian authorities are taking the COVID-19 pandemic very seriously, and not only do we have a ban on internationally flagged cruise ships from coming into Australian ports, but our borders are also closed. So you can't currently take an international cruise, but you also can't fly internationally, travel internationally. This means that if you're coming into Australia from overseas, then you go straight into 2 weeks of mandatory quarantine in hotels, where they actually pick you up from the airport and put you straight into buses and take you to the hotel. From a cruising perspective, there's been no big international cruise ships here throughout the pandemic. In fact, even the Australian P&O fleet, which is flagged in the UK, left Australian waters and went to lay up in the Philippines. There are a few exceptions. You can cruise on locally flagged ships now that restrictions are starting to ease here. And so there's a little ship, for example, called the True North, which is going to be offering local cruises out of Fremantle in Western Australia. And there's also river cruise options available as well. The flip side of this, of course, is that the majority of Australian states are in a really good place when it comes to COVID. Some states haven't had community transmission since April. It's offered those states an opportunity to really get back to a sense of normality in everything really except for travel.
I think one thing that cruise lines are worried about is that once they start cruising, they have to cruise and they have to cruise forever. And if anything goes wrong, there's nothing they can do about it. And that's just not true. There's no reason a cruise line can't start cruising again. And then if numbers go up or something happens and they need to cancel cruises, they can do it. I think it would be better if we just got in some cruises. The German cruise line AIDA have cancelled their sailings in Germany. They've looked at the coronavirus numbers, seen that they're going up in Germany, and they have decided to cancel some voyages. There's no reason that other cruise lines couldn't do that. I understand, of course, it's a lot of work for a cruise line to keep cancelling and putting on cruises, letting people down. They don't want to do that. But I'm desperate for kind of any cruises. And even if they do have to be cancelled later, I think it's really good that we're getting to test these coronavirus procedures. There are quite a few good signs when it comes to cruising and us cruising again. A lot of crew members are moving back to a lot of cruise ships. You may have remembered my friend Riley, who I spoke to on this channel a while ago. He is back, heading back to a Royal Caribbean cruise ship right now to restart work, which I think is a very positive sign. I know that we all want to cruise, and this is it's dragging, isn't it? Let's be honest with you, this year has been about 50 years long. I think it's important though that we cruise not just because we want to cruise, but because we need to test out all of the procedures that the cruise lines have spent so long working on. At the moment, the cruises that are happening in Europe are working very, very well. When they follow the procedures, everything is great. I personally would feel so much safer on a cruise right now than I do going to a restaurant or going to a supermarket on land. When you go on a cruise, everybody on that cruise will have been tested for coronavirus, and to me that's a much higher level of safety than if I just go to a restaurant that's near my house. I don't know that everybody that's gone to that restaurant that's near my house has recently had a negative coronavirus test. You see what I mean? It feels to me like I would be much safer on a cruise than out in the wild with all of these people who don't necessarily follow the rules. At least on a cruise, everybody is being held accountable to the rules and the procedures. We just need a chance to let them work. Let us try, please.
Hello guys, this is Dario from Cruise Experience. I've been on 2 cruises, on the first sailing with Mein Schiff 2. I've been on Costa cruises in September and on MSC cruises in October. It was a pleasure to be on board and has been the greatest experience ever. You know, European cruise lines were one of the first ones to cruise again after, the COVID-19 pandemic. I have to say that, these cruise lines such as MSC, Costa, river cruise lines and also TUI cruises put everything in place to, guarantee a safe cruise experience. It has been the best experience ever because with testing both passengers and crew members, offering like a reduced capacity on board, mandatory masks wearing all the time when moving around the ship, and also, guarantee laboratories on board for the worst case scenario, I think that cruise holidays are one of the safest holidays you can take at the moment. I think that we're on a good way, on a good path, for like the whole cruise industry to restart again.
A friend of mine did raise an interesting point, which is something I've never thought about. It never crossed my mind. I don't know if I'm just too naive to think about this, but in Singapore, they're actually not testing people for coronavirus at the cruise port. What they're asking people to do is to come with a negative test. I thought that's no problem, especially if you look at the numbers in Singapore, they're very, very low. But what my friend John pointed out to me is that apparently you can buy negative coronavirus tests so that you could show that and you could get on the cruise. To me, that's just absolutely mind-blowing that anybody would do that. But it is worrying. I hadn't thought about this before, but I would much prefer the cruise lines to make everybody get a test at the port. Hopefully the testing is going to get faster, it's going to get cheaper. It will be, 10 minutes, hopefully, by the time that we can cruise again. But that just blew my mind. I don't know about you if you ever thought about anything like that, but blew my mind. Maybe I have just not been on that side of the internet before, the coronavirus test side. Strange. I was lucky enough to recently have a conversation with my friend Morgan on this channel. Morgan has been on cruises recently, real cruises recently. He knows how things actually work in practice. And if you missed that conversation between him and me, you can check that out here. Just a reminder, I go live every single Friday on this channel. We do cruise trivia and we do chats with other YouTubers and cruise people just like Morgan. So watch that next.